Meow! Oopal's cat! Culture! Should we be prepping to save culture? What the heck is culture? Well, culture is however people define it, but the bottom line here is that we are prepping and we're saving a whole bunch of stuff like foraging books, knives, ferro rods, how to can books, all of that stuff. But I've said before and I'll say again, if you have something you love, you need to prep to save it. For example, for me, I think the white stripe should be survivable into the future after a huge global event that wipes out all of society. And the truth of it is that if there's a huge global event that wipes out all of society, we're going to be too busy trying to survive for quite some time. And there won't be any government or institutions to save us stuff. So I'm having computer problems and internet problems, so what's going to follow is what's left over from quite a long video I did on cultural stuff that I have. My main focus is books, but I'll show you some art, official art like paintings, and maybe some music, and some sculptures. And I want you to have a little look around your homes. What gives you joy? To quote Mondo. What is it? What gives you joy? What could you actually hang on to in an SHTF situation that could inform future generations after you're dead about what your life was like and what was important to your life and how your life was created? Because in a lot of ways, when we talk about culture in prepping, it's cultural wars. It's left versus right, gay versus straight, having a little flame war with some bunch of idiots at the moment that seem to think that the Canadian gay loony that came out this week is a threat to their masculinity in society. Anyway, they need psychotherapy. What would you save and why would you save it? Now this is nothing new. For example, Interpub66, great channel that spends a lot of time talking about his pond and how he creates his pond and looks after his fish. Surprisingly, it's fascinating to watch, even if you're not into fish and ponds. It's also, obviously from his website, a Civil War reenactor. And the people that reenact the Civil War and reenact the First World War and the Second World War and the Revolutionary War in the United States, what they're doing is they're preserving a time, they're preserving the culture of that time for future generations to understand why those events occurred. Now they're also having great fun, and that's the thing. Culture should give you joy. Anyway, without further ado, this is what I've managed to cobble together from what was left over from the video. And hopefully this will upload and hopefully everything will work out okay. So stay tuned and have a think. Be open to this. We're focusing far too much on survival, obviously. But once we've survived, I keep asking you guys, and then what? Herein follows a little bit of a discussion about and then what? Meow! Oopal's cat. And Bear, a wonderful person and a lovely subscriber of mine, posed me a question, and I think I'm going to answer it. So stay tuned. Given that art is important, and most preppers are not really prepping to save art, I've covered that before and talked about having paintings available and pencils and all the rest of it, and that's important. But if society completely ends and falls and doesn't come back, what cultural artifacts will we save for the future generations? Well, the obvious one would be this, because I'm English. This is from a dead English guy called William Shakespeare, who really was not a noble, and William Shakespeare wrote it. So this is the facsimile of the first folio. When Shakespeare died, all the actors and people in the theatre business in London loved him, put together all his plays that they could find, and there are some missing, and it's absolutely wonderful. And this is actually in Old English, so it's quite hard to read for most people. For example, Love's Labour's Lost is Love's Labour Lost. It's very guttural language. Fair fear, good for you. Where's the princess gone to a tin? Anyway, I can vaguely read this. I was trained to, and I like it. But I usually recommend reading Shakespeare in modern language. It's a lot more accessible that way. Now, what will happen to our own language in Grid Down is interesting. because language will become very localized. Accents, dialects will become very localized, and over a period of time will actually become new languages. One could argue already American English is entirely incomprehensible to most of the world that speak proper English like I do. Bugging out with this would be quite difficult. It's the works of Geoffrey Chaucer, and it's really heavy. Again, fake copy of what a guy called William Morris did to it, with the typesetting and the rest of it. Yeah, I think this sort of stuff should be saved in the fall of humanity. But I don't think we can bug out with it, can we? So you can make up little USB discs like this and put on stories, which this has on it. It has video and audio stories, short stories that a friend did for Kitty. So you can do this, but then you're risking EMP and loss. Even the bleeding obvious, people will save stuff like this. These will be knocking around in a lot of people's homes. We went to Italy and we bought this to keep a reminder of it. This sort of stuff will be kept and found, I'm sure. Some cultural icons will not be kept and found. Culture that's important. One of the greatest bands in the world, now defunct, went north and did very small concerts for Americans to Canada, because everybody likes Canada, eh? So this is actually a time and place book. This is a very quick snapshot in the 2000s of a band encountering an alien life form in Canada. And from cultural significance, if you want to talk to people about what things were like, these sorts of books are very important. There's also this type of a book, books of photographs. Recommend the documentary a lot. I think it's on Netflix still. But this is also a time and a place, and it'll also show people, when you're talking about what New York was like, to actually see people's eyes and their expressions as they go about their daily business is extremely powerful. You may or may not have seen this before, but this is in our living room. Kitty bought this and she loves it. Art's always worth keeping if you can. This, I don't know. I really don't know, but Kitty loves it. This is one of mine that I got. This is, again, it's an original painting done by an artist, and it kind of captures, for me, the spirit of Ontario's north. Maybe completely different a few years after SHTF. I think sculptures like these will be kept. I don't think people will break them and throw them out, and they may not have them immediately, but when they come across these, they're going to collect and keep them. These are some of the books in my cultural preservation collection, stuff that I would make an active attempt to keep, and I'll go through a bit of them in a minute. But not the nude, so don't get excited. I've said before, I think books should be kept, if you can. Wrap them in cling film, put them away, keep them dry, keep them preserved until such time as you can actually start to use these. Even the fiction books, all of this stuff is invaluable. It will tell people in the future what we lived like in the now. Oral histories is what we'll end up with if we're not very careful to prep for keeping some technology for paper making and ink making, all of which are pretty straightforward, and using wood to make rudimentary printing presses. All that stuff's going to take time and energy. We won't have that in a major SHTF. But before we all die off, we need to pass this stuff along. The history of England's a bit of a waste of time. If society completely falls and goes away, never comes again. Books about the English Empire, they might be very useful. War books telling people why we fought and how we fought. All this stuff is irreplaceable. And it's going to be very hard to keep it going in a major SHTF. So my plan is to cling film and keep it dry. I have to do the armchair prepper again soon. Anyway, this is a book that I for sure would want you all to keep. It might not make it. Kenneth Clark's Civilization, 1968, I believe. He trundled around the world and looked very exclusively at mostly Western and buildings, and it's really a time capsule of how our society evolved and became what it is today. Cartography, for those of you who don't know, map making, map reading. A book like this is going to be a useful thing to keep. Mapping the world, it's the history of how Western man, mainly, started out by learning how to map and how to make it more and more useful, and of course eventually allowing colonization, invasion of various parts of the world, and then trade in various things, including people for a while, and still is. But it shows you the history of map making And that again is going to be invaluable. Not immediately after SHTF, but maybe 25, 50 years, 200, 500 years later. If you've got a book like this and you can actually put it in cling film, stop it from getting flooded, stop it from getting direct light on it, it may be preserved. Now, of course, preserving books in SHTF is nothing new. William Miller wrote Canticle for Leibowitz, which is pretty much entirely, spoiler, you should read it, it's a great book, pretty much entirely based upon preserving our books and our texts and even scraps of blueprints from the now that was destroyed in an all-out nuclear war. So at some point in the future, people with the energy and the capacity and technological rebuild could use that material to make their world better. I'm not altogether convinced it's worth putting much effort into trying to save books like this. Books like the 100 Greatest Paintings or the 100 Greatest Buildings and stuff like that, you're going to have available, I think. They're going to automatically get preserved by various people. Venus's Botticelli, of course, excellent. This is noted. The reason this is noted is because I actually used this when I did we had a major nuclear war in May of 2019, and you prepped and you survived. And it's now 2039 and you're in your late 80s, and the children of the village gather round you because they like the tales you tell of the before times, and you want to tell them about Egypt, about the great civilizations that were relying upon flooding and grain harvesting in the continent of Africa. Pulling out a book like this, if you've preserved it, will help. It really will. To actually describe the Wall of China to somebody without pictures or any previous knowledge or pictures of the Great Wall of China is pretty much impossible. But a book like this could be very useful. This is, of course, The Wonders of the World, and I think this would also probably get saved. The critical ones, Cities and Civilization, again, to explain how cities function and the good parts of cities and the bad parts of cities and how our cities evolved, is really going to be tough. Talking about salons and dancing in the streets, not a PC picture anymore, but yeah, all of this stuff, like, you know, how cities got ready for war and it was a male endeavour, how transport, hospitals, big government came into place. Immigration, major factor of driving cities bigger. Sydney, Australia, Royal Botanic Gardens. 1924, Sydney Bridge. All of this stuff will help you explain to a generation that has had no TV, no magazines, no official schooling, what the world was and what parts of that world need to be resurrected and which parts we could probably do without. Now, this is an absolute critical book to have. This is The Earth, an Intimate History. It's literally the history of geology. It talks about money, it talks about a whole bunch of different things, about how humanity interacted with the entire planet for various reasons. It talks about earthquakes, you know, tectonic plates, and the origin of earthquakes is not that obvious. You know, this is Scotland. How did that rock become the way it is? You can worship things and get lost again in tribal history if you don't understand basic physics and basic geography and basic geology and basic botany. So books like this are great. Craters, the idea of a massive crater forming because of an attack from an asteroid may not sound that plausible 25 years after a nuclear war to the generation born after the nuclear war. And certainly 250 years after an all-out nuclear war, provided humanity is still around. To be able to jump past fear and magical thinking, to actually jump past that, to be able to explain why things are the way they are in rational and realistic terms, jump starts a civilization like nothing else. I mean, we've all got our prepping books, right? How to make knots, how to forage, all of that stuff. What we don't typically keep is books that are actually going to allow people to jumpstart technology. Now, I know some of you out there are doing that, like you have your basic electronic books and your basic carpentry books and stuff like that. Absolutely important, absolutely. But what we're not doing is we're not saving books that actually speak to our heart and our minds, the things we enjoyed. Now, I have no doubt in a massive, massive SHTF, the Bible, the Quran, the Constitution of the United States will survive. And some of you out there are probably thinking, well, that's all we need. I disagree. I think if you like things like I like books, I'd like to keep some literature books. I think it would be a shame if some of the works or all of the works of Dickens or Shakespeare were lost forever. We're going to fall, and we're going to fall hard. We're going to get up again. That's what we do. We'll either be wiped out or we'll get up again. It would be nice if some preppers spent some effort into cultural prepping, cultural preserving for the future. Very much like William Miller suggested in Canticle for Libowitz. I think that's a great idea. Now, you don't have to be stuck on books. What's your passion? Are you passionate about ballet? Maybe keep some ballet shoes. Get some second-hand ballet shoes and keep them. Maybe get a book on introduction to ballet and keep that. Maybe keep a couple of musical scores that is done for ballet performances. If you're into plays and stuff like that, keep some playbooks. All of this stuff is just going to become toilet paper, fire tinder and rot without a technological society to preserve and protect it. Our job as preppers is to survive. Our main function is to recreate a community that's vibrant and happy and functional, to hopefully avoid a future SHTF after we've survived SHTF. I know that's asking a lot, but all I'm really saying is, what things around you do you find culturally valuable to you? What things give you pleasure over and over when you touch them, see them, or smell them? Remember, perfumes can also be protected for a little while. How to make perfumes is a skill. That's something, if you're really into perfumes, that you might want to do. So what I'm saying is, for each and every one of you out there that actually gets to this part of the video, which is not going to be a huge number of people, have a little think in the next week or two what cultural value items that you have now that would probably not make it either through SHTF or after you die after SHTF. And how could you preserve them and protect them from the struggling generations, so when the generations start to reinvent things like electricity and plumbing, that you can actually have that gift from you to the future. Anyway, that's all from me. Remember, in SHTF, tomorrow will always be worse than today, unless you prep. So let's get prepping. Let's think about the future, long term. Toodles.